The Constitutional Court has granted Parliament yet another extension to finalise the Electoral Amendment Bill. Back in 2020, the Apex Court declared that parts of the Electoral Act were constitutionally invalid, or unconstitutional if you like, as the Act made it impossible basically for candidates to stand for political office without being members of political parties. So will this new Act, or the Act in its new form, be ready in time for the 2024 elections? Let's make sense of it. Bring in former Cabinet Minister Valli Moosa, who joins us via our video link this morning. Great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks as always for making time to speak to us. And it's worth tracking the timeline as we make sense of this latest development. It was back in June 2020 already that the Constitutional Court declared parts of this Act unconstitutional. It gave Parliament 24 months and they failed to meet that deadline. So to what extent can we be confident that Parliament will be able to complete in 2 months what it couldn't do in 24 months?
Good morning, Ayanda, and good morning to your listeners. I'm not really able to comment on whether Parliament will complete the work in 2 months. As you've said quite correctly, that Parliament has been rather negligent on this matter. In fact, all of the political parties have been rather negligent. We're coming up for almost 3 years since the Constitutional Court decision, and there's more than enough time. Parliament has had more than enough time to deal with this matter. I'd like to just remind you that in the 90s, I led the ANC's negotiating team in the Constitutional Assembly when we were drafting the final constitution. We drafted the final constitution in the period from 1994 to 1996. It took 2 years to draft the entire new constitution and to agree to it and have a vote and have it certified by the Constitutional Court. In fact, just over 2 years. So the 2-year period that the Constitutional Court gave to Parliament was more than adequate, and I think it has to be said that Parliament has been negligent as far as this matter is concerned, because you're not changing the whole Constitution, you're changing certain elements of the electoral system. Now, one of the reasons I think this has happened is because the political parties really don't want to change the electoral system. They're all reasonably comfortable that they are in Parliament, they're sitting there. The 400 members of Parliament, in their own minds, think, if it wasn't for this electoral system, maybe I wouldn't have been here. So they don't really have the motivation to do so. But having said that, I am happy that the Constitutional Court has given additional time. I think that's the correct decision the court has taken. It's the right thing to do, because the electoral system and the right to vote, Ayanda, goes to the very heart of our democracy and any democracy for that matter. And as a country, we must get it right. It's not something to be rushed. The Parliament now has done quite a bit of work on the matter, and I think that in the next 2 months, it should be able, well, less than 2 months. I think it's the end of February. So you've got enough time, I think, to be able to do this. None of this will in any way jeopardize the 2024 elections. There's enough time. The IEC has got a competent machinery. And of course, the IEC itself is rather reluctant to have many changes to the electoral system because it will create a lot of work for them. But that's neither here nor there. The IEC has the responsibility to organize elections, and that can be done. I'd like to talk to you about the content of what is creating the difficulties for Parliament, if you don't mind.
Before we get there, Mr. Moosa, before we get there, apologies for interrupting you there. I just want to sort of make sense of part of what you've just said. You believe that this won't jeopardize the 2024 elections. I wonder what makes you so confident, given even just the perspective you've been able to give us around how long it's taken you and your team a few years ago to come up with the entire Constitution versus how quickly, or not so quick, Parliament has been able to fix this one issue, complex as it may be, with one act.
Yeah, look, I am of the view, I've thought about this long and hard, that the only way forward for Parliament right now would be to adopt the kind of hybrid electoral system that has been suggested by many people, and I think that's what Parliament is likely to look at closely. And the reason why the National Council of Provinces have rejected the bill that came from the National Assembly. By the way, the process has been the National Assembly approved the new system. It went to the National Council of Provinces, and the Council of Provinces rejected it. And so therefore it came back to the National Assembly for reconsideration. And that's the reason why the Constitutional Court needed to give an extension of time. And the reason why it was rejected is because the system proposed by the National Assembly is that independent candidates can register in a province. And if you run as an independent, for example, in the Eastern Cape, then you would be able to gather votes from anywhere in the province in order to be able to get elected. And what it does is that it takes away any kind of accountability, but it also, in a strange way, gives independents the same rights as political parties, because political parties in a proportional system pick up votes from anywhere and they get seats in proportion to the number of votes that they've got. So it's become a very distorted and irrational approach. We also got the problem that if the ballot paper each ballot paper in the province gives you all the independent candidates in the whole province, you run the risk of having a ballot paper that runs into like about 1,000 candidates. And that becomes really unmanageable for the voter. So probably where Parliament would end up, and that's my guess, it's the only rational thing to do under the circumstances, is to have a hybrid system where independent candidates would stand for elections in the metro or in the district. And once you have that, so in other words, you will have about just over 60 sort of big constituencies in the country, and candidates would register in those constituencies. Once you have that, it becomes easy for the IEC, because the IEC has already organized the voter registration and voter rolls in accordance with the metro and the district boundaries. And once you have that, we will in a very easy way enter into a new era of political party candidates and independent candidates competing with each other and voters having a real choice. This is a proposal that was made way back in 1996 by the Van Zyl-Slabbert report. It's a proposal that was made by President Kgalema Motlanthe when he was asked to make independent recommendations, him and his task team. It's not far away from the advisory committee that I headed up and the advice that we had given to government about 2 years ago.
Sure.
And so I think that this is something where it would land, and I'm happy that the time has been given to Parliament to do this. But if they don't do that, if they stick by the rather irrational, untested system which they had put forward already, then we do run the risk that it will be challenged in the Constitutional Court, because frankly it will be unconstitutional, because it undermines the principle of proportionality, and then the elections could be in jeopardy.
Yeah, and if Parliament's track record is anything to go by, that's a real possibility. And of course, we're not trying to be fear-mongers here, but there is data that we can look to kind of suggest how this might actually land up, especially because, as you've rightly pointed out, there's been criticism against Parliament for not having enough political will to see this through, because potentially it's not in the parliamentarians' interests to actually fix this.
Yes, it's not in the interest of members of Parliament to fix this, because unfortunately our members of Parliament do not want an election where he or she has to stand in front of voters and say, "My name is Ayanda Nyati. Vote for me, I'm a good man," and answer the questions that the public have and compete with another candidate, who may be saying the same sort of thing. Members of Parliament don't want to do that. They're happy to hide behind the names of their political parties. But actually they have no choice in this matter, Ayanda. It has to be changed, because the Constitution says that there needs to be accountability, responsiveness, and a direct link with voters, and there needs to be independent candidates. The Constitution says that very clearly, and President Mandela, when he delivered his final speech on his retirement in March 1999, after his 5-year term, he said he's not going to run again, and he made his final speech, his goodbye speech to Parliament. In that speech, President Mandela said, the one piece of work that has been left undone is the adoption of a proper electoral system which will create a direct link between members of parliament and the voters. And he asked parliament to attend to it. So there is a huge compelling reason to do this, and parliament will just have to do it. And let's hope that our country often pulls back from the precipice, and this is one more time where parliament will surprise all of us and do the right thing.
Yeah, I wonder how many opportunities any country can get to do exactly that, but hopefully we've still got a few more in our inventory. The other concern, of course, is around what else the Constitutional Court can actually do without breaching that principle of the separation of powers here, because the Constitutional Court can only grant so many extensions after making a declaration that this act is unconstitutional before something else has to give, because I can't imagine a scenario where we go to 2024 without this being fixed.
Well, you recall, Ayanda, that our Constitutional Court, like a number of apex courts around the world, doesn't believe in sitting back. That if any other organ of state simply refuses to abide by the law, the court then takes the decision. Let me remind you what happened in the case of former Minister Bathabile Dlamini and the SASSA grants.
Yeah.
You would recall that the court issued order after order which was simply not adhered to by the government at the time. It then said to the minister, you shall do the following and report to the court every 3 months on the progress that you're making. And that was purely a managerial and administrative decision which the court had taken. In other words, it had ventured into the terrain of the government because the government was refusing to do so. And there is a possibility here that if Parliament simply refuses to attend to this matter properly, the court will decide on the new electoral system. It will say something like, for the 2024 elections, the electoral system shall be the following. Until such time as which Parliament applies its mind and adopts a new electoral system, the following system shall apply. There is a possibility that the court may actually do that. It's not the best solution because at the end of the day you want elected representatives to decide on the electoral system, but if they refuse to do that, the court is duty-bound to implement the Constitution. And I think that it probably will, and we probably will end up there if Parliament refuses to do its work.
How would that not be seen as the courts doing Parliament's work?
Well, what the court is likely to do is they will say, this applies only for 2024. It is an interim order, and Parliament has the opportunity to then do whatever it thinks would be the correct and acceptable electoral system in terms of the Constitution. So it won't necessarily make it a permanent order, but it will give Parliament a chance. But what it would do, it would say that for the 2024 elections, we must hold it in such a manner, we must design the electoral system in such a manner that we do not violate the Constitution. So it could do that. I'm not saying it will,
right,
but I think it could do that. It has, if I look at some of the precedents, this is a court that doesn't sit back. It doesn't say, oh, well, government, this is what the Constitution says, but if you don't want to do it, well, don't do it. That's not the approach of our Constitutional Court. And frankly, it's not the approach of most apex courts around the world, that where the authorities refuse to adhere to decisions and decisions of the court, they generally tend to take a further step. Because when the court does that, the IEC will have no choice but to then conduct the elections in terms of the court order. But I hope we don't get there.
Yeah.
And we don't need to go there. Parliament is not just beginning now. They've been debating this matter for quite some time. And I think it's a short hop from now until the end of February for Parliament to correct this matter. And there are many people, including myself, who've made our services available to Parliament and are willing to assist in order to ensure that we get there in a proper way. And that should be our first choice. We must try to take the right decisions as a country.
Absolutely. It's a hope that I'm sure is shared by many South Africans, and hopefully Parliament is listening and will take you up on their offer if in fact they need the help. But for now, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us and helping us connect the dots, as it were. Valli Moosa is a former cabinet minister. Once again, appreciate your time on the